Welcome back, system administrators. Today, we're really rolling up our sleeves. We're doing a deep dive technical walkthrough based directly on some fantastic documentation from Depeche and the team at Motifzone. We're tackling a highly specific and honestly a highly requested topic in Oracle Fusion applications, costing override using fast formula. So if you're the one responsible for making sure payroll accounting hits the exact right ledger segments under, very dynamic conditions, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Grab your notes, because we're going to break down exactly how to configure this whole thing step by step.
Okay, let's dive right into this. How do you actually override costing segments at runtime? Now, normally, your payroll relies on a pretty rigid costing hierarchy. It's set in stone, right? But what happens when that hierarchy just isn't enough? The core challenge we're solving today is how to bypass those rigid, predefined costing hierarchies for a recurring element without completely breaking your entire payroll process. You need the system to be smart enough to change destinations on the fly based on specific logic.
And that brings us to the formal definition for Motifzone. Costing override is essentially the act of overriding a costing segment at runtime through a fast formula, where your input values are defined with a reference code specific to that costing segment. The exact use case we're looking at today is incredibly practical. Imagine you've got a recurring element and you need to dynamically override exactly two specific segments at runtime. Meanwhile, the rest of your data, you just want that to fall back and behave normally based on your standard costing hierarchy. So we're targeting precision overrides here. It's like using a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. Section 1, upgrading the payroll environment. Section 2, fast formula logic explained. Section 3, mapping status processing rules. And finally, Section 4, final validation and results. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Upgrading the payroll environment. Setting the foundation. We've got to handle these prerequisites before we touch any code.
Let's move briskly through these foundational steps. Step 1. You'll log into Oracle Fusion Applications and submit a flow to upgrade your payroll configuration. Specifically, you want to use the parameter Enable Context for Costing Key FlexField segments. Once that's done, Step 2 is running another flow, the Run Element Upgrade. You'll give it a unique name, set the mode to Final, and check the primary classification of the element needing the upgrade. In the Motifzone example, this is supplemental earnings. Now, crucially, for the formula upgrade option, you absolutely have to choose Do Not Make Changes to the existing formula. Once that finishes up, you move to Step 3. Navigate over to the Manage Elements page to create your new input values with the reference code associated with the costing segment you're overriding. A pro tip here, you can effectively process this by creating the input values using an HDL file and then validating your eligibility costing.
Moving right along to Section 2. Fast formula logic explained, the core mechanism. This is where things get really interesting.
So, the crucial point is, according to Motifzone, you actually have incredible flexibility here. You can write custom logic to fetch the required override values based on specific worker attributes, or even custom table lookups. It's really up to you. But the absolute hard and fast requirement, you must pass these results dynamically using a return statement. Think of the return statement as the delivery vehicle. It carries your calculated values out of the fast formula and drops them right back into the payroll engine. But hold on, here is a massive red flag you absolutely need to be aware of. Motifzone explicitly notes this. Person-level override will affect this as formula-level customizations have been made. As a system administrator, you have to understand the downstream impacts of these customizations. If a user goes in and manually places a person-level override on that element, well, it's going to interact with and potentially supersede the logic you just carefully crafted in your fast formula. So make absolutely sure you document this behavior clearly for your payroll operations team. You don't want any surprises.
All right, Section 3, mapping status processing rules, bridging the logic.
And this brilliantly illustrates how we bridge the gap. You're going to navigate to the element status processing rule. Here, you take the output results coming directly from your fast formula return statements, and you precisely map them one-to-one to those new override input values you created back in Step 1. It's basically like connecting the wiring. The formula calculates the value, the rule catches that output and routes it right into the specific costing segment. This right here, this is the linchpin of the entire operation. Finally, Section 4. Final validation and results, completing the setup. Just a few final tweaks to make sure the system actually triggers this. Now, you've got to update the payroll process configuration with a very specific parameter. It's called distributed costing to use set element eligibility. By default, this is set to N. You need to flip that override value to Y. Why does this matter so much? Well, this parameter controls whether distributed costing uses the element eligibility defined in the distribution set when the distributed element already has element costing. Simply put, when you set it to Y, you're forcing the process to apply the distribution group member's element eligibility values. If you just leave it at the default N, the system is basically going to ignore all your custom work and stubbornly follow the normal costing hierarchy instead. Changing this to Y is literally what flips the switch and activates your dynamic override.
The very last step of your implementation is simply to run your processes and validate the output within your payroll costing results. You just want to ensure those two dynamic segments are overriding perfectly while the rest seamlessly default as planned. As the documentation from Team Motifzone reminds us, let's drive innovation with Motifzone. By taking control of your fast formulas like this, you're literally transforming a rigid system into a highly adaptable payroll engine. So now that you've mastered dynamically overriding costing segments, what other rigid payroll processes are you going to automate next? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive and keep pushing those boundaries.